Welcome to this month's Greg Griffith Leadership Podcast. Join Greg Griffith as we together learn what it means to be leaders of our world as we faithfully love and faithfully lead. Like, share, rate, and review this podcast with your friends and others of influence, for they too are looking for people like you to help them lead and love day to day. Without further ado, here is your host, Greg Griffith.
Well, hey leaders, it is so good to be with you again, and I am so excited. For today's guests, we have Jen and Josh Dotzler, and they are just going to knock your socks off today with this great interview. And what I'm really excited about is these are two people that love Jesus, love their family, and love their city, and love connecting people to Jesus and to the city. And so I'm really excited about what we're going to learn through this. I'm excited for what I'm going to learn. They have been running an organization called Abide here in North Omaha since 2014. They met in college through a college Bible study and have been married and have children and are just wonderful people for the kingdom of God. And so today, get ready, hold on, and here we go. Jen and Josh, so glad to have you. Thanks so much for being here today.
Oh my goodness, thank you for having us.
Yeah, so good to be together.
Yeah.
Love being here in the cool new studio. And
yeah,
anytime I get to do a podcast with my wife, it's a good
How
day.
fun.
yes,
I love it.
Yes, so much fun, so much fun. Well, first, just tell us about your family.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Josh and I, we have 4 kids, 12, 10, 9, and 5. All very different, unique in their own ways,
different.
very humbling because we're parenting them all the same, but they're all turning out so different, right? And that's our 2 boys, 2 girls.
2 boys, 2 girls. Been married for 15 years.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, met in college and got married. And 2 years later, had our first son, Joshua.
Right.
And we have 4 kids, all completely different. Same family, different personalities. We've got, our oldest loves robotics and engineering. Our
right.
second, sports. Girls love dance. And so we're in the season of life now with ages of kids where we're pretty busy. Nights are pretty full.
I feel like we're just arriving on the scene of activities in like sports and youth sports and activities in general, and it is crazy. So we're kind of
happy to be out of diapers. I'll tell you that.
Oh, for sure.
Thought we'd never get out of that phase, so we're happy to be out of the diaper phase. But no, it's fun.
And we have a dog named Jet.
We do.
Labradoodle. Mm-hmm. He's part of
Labradoodle.
the family.
And so after COVID, we started to homeschool.
Right.
I should say Jen started homeschooling.
That's
I was
right.
supporting. And then now our kids are a part of kind of a hybrid school.
Homeschool, right.
So it's fun because with our life and work and ministry, they get to participate a lot. But then also they're a part of a community through the school that they're a part of.
You know, you guys talked a little bit about just parenting, and kids are so different.
Yeah.
Right.
And you raise the difference. And my 2 girls, total opposites. They're just totally different people. And I find myself kind of going, wait, like, how is this possible?
Right.
And it's just a reminder that God is a God who builds a DNA, and each one of us are individually. But do you guys find too, like, even you have to parent even a little differently so that they,
Oh, for sure.
We
for
found
sure.
that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We find that. I mean, we parent the same in general, but then
Yeah.
overall, each kid is wired so differently. Like you said, God
Yeah.
wires and uniquely designs us. So then we see that in each and every one of them. So then we try to feed into that and encourage them in the gifts that they're given, but they are so stinking different.
The most challenging part of leadership is leading your family and your kids. It's like I can talk about leadership principles and things, but then when it comes to being at home, and just because, all 4 of them are so different, and we also argue about different personality traits and like who gets credit for which ones, and so it's also a test of our marriage too. But it is. I mean, it's part of the joy of our kids. Like we've got one who he'll walk into a dark alley at night and is fearless, and then one who won't walk into a lit up alley during the day. And so just those different personalities, it's part of the beauty of God.
Well, you two, your faith inspires me, and I aspire to live out faith like you both do. And Jen, you're going through, I think, right now, like an evagelism course, right?
Yeah,
in class,
yeah.
And getting a degree in that.
Yeah,
Is that
so
right?
it's a master's program.
Wow.
It's I'm with a cohort of women, and we're together for 4 years. the same group, and we're kind of journeying together. But it's a program designed for women in ministry and pastors' wives, and so lots of rich learning. I feel like I'm in a season just being stretched, and it's been such a gift. But also just a tension of dynamics with teaching the kids homeschool and then learning myself. So it's been a very interesting season, but yeah, something that I'm in right now.
That's really cool. So tell me about your faith upbringing as children. Like, was this something that just always was there? Was it, because as you're living it out now, right? Tell me about that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Very different faith backgrounds and upbringing. So my parents, when I was 2, grew up in a Christian home. My parents started our nonprofit Abide, 33 years ago. And so I kind of grew up under this kind of missionary mindset. I mean, we were missionaries to North Omaha. We actually, when I was in the 6th grade, lived in Mexico for 6 months as part of a mission organization. My parents wanted to learn Spanish, just kind of grew up in that environment. So my personal faith journey, I tell people I always loved what my parents were doing, but I didn't want to be a part of it. And part of it was because of the challenges that they faced on a consistent basis. And so I thought basketball, sports was my ticket out of the community, out of just kind of ministry in general. And it was through an injury playing basketball at Creighton that God really used that, I'd say, to get my attention and started to kind of redirect my focus in my life. And a lot of the things that were instilled in me as a young person, I started to remember those things, and those things started to take root in my life. But the model of my parents and family definitely gave me a picture of what it looked like to pursue God and to live on faith and to sacrifice radically. And so that was kind of the picture I grew up with, where Jen grew up in a very different environment.
Completely different.
I'll say this before she tells her story. If you were around us, you would think she grew up as a Christian, and I grew up like in the non-Christian.
No way.
Because she's a much better follower of Jesus than me. But just a very different background that she grew up
for
in.
sure. So my mom's from Thailand, first generation, and then my dad is third generation Mexican. And growing up in a very culturally rich, thick home, they both did not come from a faith background at all. So they raised us, I'd say, more culturally Catholic.
Yeah.
So we attended out of tradition, out of like what they knew, but not out of like maybe a personal relationship. And so it wasn't until I was in high school that my mom started watching televangelists. And so it's so funny to say that because I know a lot of people.
Shout out to the televangelists.
Yeah, they're like,
man.
they get knocked down. But I feel like it wasn't until that moment my mom started watching that on TV, because she was kind of isolated, being a foreigner mindset, that she just felt like that was the only way that she could bring hope into the house, and that she found hope through the TV and started having us sit down and watch it. And we were like, oh, wow, there is hope outside of this world. And it can be, something tangible for us one day. And so then I started attending a youth group. My friend invited me to in high school, and then gave my life to the Lord. Didn't know what that meant, though. I was like, what does this mean? And then kind of searched for a few years on like, what does that look like? And then went to college, got invited to this college Bible study, met the Dotzlers. And I said, oh, this is what it is. Like, this is what you guys are modeling, what I've been searching for, and fell in love with the people then, which it was before they had a church ministry. And Josh and I then met, and kind of the rest is history for us meeting. But that's kind of my faith background.
I'll say this too. I think it's interesting. There's no perfect family. And so even though I grew up in the environment I grew up in, I think there's been, what we've learned is there's strengths to both of our upbringings from not being immersed in the church world and some of the things. I think as somebody who grew up in the church world and around missionaries, you take on these things and you think everybody else knows and life is done the same way. And I think I've learned so much too, and our hearts, I think, for people who are unchurched is so big because of some of our experiences, upbringing, and just how those experiences are working together.
Yeah, let me ask this question. This wasn't on our sheet, but I'm just fascinated a little bit by this, because you're right. I mean, first, Josh, your growing up, your experience, it is so unique. I don't know that I've met a whole lot of people where, I know your story of your mom and dad, and they said, we want to minister to North Omaha.
Yeah.
And they left a good career in West Omaha and moved into the inner city and said, we're going to live in the inner city. you know, and we didn't even talk about that. They just built their own church with their children, right? 14 of you,
14,
right?
yeah.
I mean, yeah. So, so just a whole different, and I didn't even know you lived in Mexico and did that.
Yeah.
So your sacrifice was more than financial. It was like actual physical, like we're getting up, we're moving, so unique, right? You're growing up different, right? First generation here in America, right? Was that, because you know, we all bring our backgrounds, our family system. Was that hard? Was that, I mean, like, how was that? Because I would just feel like this is like two different worlds almost colliding, right?
Right. Yeah, you're right. I feel like it's a good question. It's like, oh, well, you know, the natural things. It's like we're the same age. We have a lot in common. We're attracted to each other. All these different things.
I'm attractive.
It works, you know.
You're
and then
great, I'm great.
It's like we're both American, you know. And then
You're
we
in
don't
college, I'm
consider
in college.
right. But then we don't consider like our cultural backgrounds and differences. And we didn't see that until I feel like a few years in, really, that we were like, wait, I think that's because of our cultural, like our backgrounds are so different. And I feel like it started even with the food that we ate. And he would say, you know, why aren't you, you know, the food that we're eating, when do you like eat or cook American food? And I was like, what do you mean? What's American food? You know, this is American food. And so we had to have a conversation about that. Like, and I said, what do you expect food to look like? You know, and
I didn't know people had beans and rice literally every day for breakfast and burritos and lived off. I mean, again, I lived in Mexico for 6 months. Like, so I like Mexican food. My sister has been a missionary in Thailand for, I mean, years. And so I love culture. I love diversity, like was drawn to diversity, but living that out on a day-to-day basis from the food that she grew up eating, not just once in a while, but every day, the rhythms of life. I had 13 brothers and sisters. You go to our family activities and outings. Number one, they're loud. There's chaos. There's kids everywhere. I grew up taking care of young children and kids. I'll never forget one of the first times or early on when we're hanging out at my parents' house. I mean, she's the youngest of 3 girls. You go to their family's house, I would walk away saying, it's so quiet. It's so boring. There's nothing going on. She'd walk away from my house saying, I need a break. That was the loudest,
so loud
most
at their house.
chaotic experience I've ever had.
I'd go home and I'd say, I need to stare at a wall. It was so loud. It was so loud.
I think, we could talk about our differences for days.
Sure.
I'll say this for the first several months of our marriage. I think what we all do is we think the way we grew up was right and best. And again, I'll say this, especially, you know, you talk about my family's history and a lot of great things, but the pride or arrogance of thinking that's how life should be was what I carried into our marriage. And so for months, you know, there was this just going back and forth and arguing and trying to prove why one way was better than the other. And ultimately, it was a heart posture, you know, through people that were around us, but saying, all right, my way's not right. And more than my way's not right, I gotta invite God to change me. I need to stop trying to change my wife. And as we both kind of, I would say, adopted that heart posture, we started to enjoy the differences and see them as beauty. I'll say one more thing, just in the whole like differences in strengths. I'm very forward thinking, visionary, strategic. She doesn't carry that strength as much. And I'll never forget one time being so frustrated. I was in the car and I was like, in my mind, we knew we were going somewhere. We should have had everything laid out. We should have, like, why isn't she thinking strategically? And I felt like God said, Josh, I didn't give her the gift of strategy. I gave it to you. And so don't put an expectation on her that's not consistent with who she's called to be. And so just, it's the journey of life and family and valuing strengths in each other. And
and
just
appreciation.
learning.
I feel like even going back to like, once we had that heart change and kind of an agreement of like, man, something needs to change.
Yeah.
And we appreciated each other's strengths and then saw each other's weaknesses and saw how we could help each other and work that together in marriage. And I think all of us kind of learned that in marriage. You know, it's a team effort. And so, and we need each other. And so I think once we kind of recognized that and realized that, it really changed so much. Not that we like arrived, but like more we recognized that and we continue to see that show up in different ways. We're like, oh yeah, like that's something that you have that I need and something I have that you need. And when we work together, it's so beautiful.
Well, and that's a great segue into next better together, which is abide.
Yeah.
And, could you share a little bit of just quickly, what is abide, and into how did you move in? Your dad was the founder of Abide, right? Your family ran this ministry. You kind of said, no, I don't. You went to college thinking, and then you kind of shared it was the injury that God, but how did you then build this to say, this is also my passion? And then Jen, I'm really curious for you, because it's also your passion, and you can see that. I mean, anyone that's watched you guys run this organization, you both are passionate about this. And so just curious how you got into it and said, this is where we're leading.
Yeah. My dad, when he started Abide, I would say his driving passion was to see the potential, the capacity in the church be a part of changing and impacting the world. And so his heart, I would say, more than just for North Omaha, it was to say, man, there's so much potential in the people of the church with resources and time and expertise. If we could use that to make a practical difference, our world could look differently. So when he first started our nonprofit organization, he was taking teams to small rural towns all over Nebraska and Iowa and mobilizing them through service and work projects. And it morphed into our family living in North Omaha and mobilizing people to communities in North Omaha through fixing up houses and beautifying neighborhoods and starting nonprofits and programming. And so that was kind of the genesis of the organization. And I'll never forget, in the 6th grade, my dad took me to a conference, the Global Leadership Summit. And he was all about exposing us to leadership. And even at a young age, he would tell me and my siblings, man, you're a leader. You're a leader. Be like, no, Dad, I'm not a leader. And I remember being at the GLS, and I remember the statement, the church is the hope of the world. And I remember even in the 6th grade, that did something inside of me. I believed it at some level. And as my journey progressed and sports became a huge part of my identity, and with sports being cool and was pursuing that lifestyle, and through my injury in playing basketball, first thing God did was get my attention and let me know there's more to life than just basketball. But the second thing I think is he started to have me on this path to really pursuing and understanding my purpose. And that was right around the time we met. And so with that, it was getting married, and then it was kind of that journey together of discovering who it is that God had called us to be. We were getting ready to graduate, and we basically said, God, whatever door you open up, that's what door we'll walk through. We had sold a bunch of stuff. We thought we were going to do one of two things: either move overseas, and I was going to play professionally at some level, or we were going to go join an organization like a YWAM, or she had studied international studies. And so that was kind of our dream. It was 2009, job freezes, some crisis in our world. My dad basically said, hey, you can come work with us. We had been a part of the church Bridge. It had just started. He said, hey, you can come serve with us until you figure out what you want to do. And so we moved into one bedroom. There's this building that my parents renovated, volunteers. The top floor of the bedroom, Jen and I lived in one room. There was another lady who lived in the next room. My parents lived in the main area. Friends of ours, Myron and Kristen, lived in the basement. And my dad paid us, I got paid $1,000 a month. We got pregnant shortly after with our first son, Joshua. And just kind of slowly started to move into this ministry. And I'll say this, people come to the ministry and organization and see where it's at today. It wasn't like that when we started. There was about 5 or so of us on staff. It was very small, very organic, very grassroots. There wasn't a lot that was very, I would say, attractive about that. But we felt like by faith, this was our next step. And then I would say for at least the next 5 years, it was a lot of obedience. Because it was just, you hear stories of people and ministry and church. And I mean, there was nothing attractive about a lot of the things that we were doing. But there was relationships, friendships, and there was a sense of this is where we feel like God is calling us. And we feel like God is birthing something and doing something. And I would say through that, we've always had a heart to A, see the church known for change, but then B, as we're living in the community and working next to neighbors and children who are just growing up in these hopeless environments, just this heart to want to make a difference in their lives in the best we can. Right. And so I would say that was kind of the start to kind of, I mean, where we are, 13, 14 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here's what I think is so important, what I heard you out of there, and I would say this especially to younger leaders and younger generation, don't despise small beginnings.
Man.
Right.
I mean,
so good.
Because to look and say, here's where I want to be, I want to start there. The reality is no leader actually started where they're at today.
That's right.
Right, and it always starts with really small beginnings. But just saying, hey, this is where I'm pouring in.
Yes.
So how to become your passion? Jen?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Josh, obviously, he's like born into it and said yes as time went on. I feel like for me, being born and raised in South Omaha and in the marginalized, impoverished area in a family, I always say, like, Josh, I love your family's work and I love what they do. I so admire and am inspired by it. And then I said one day, I said, your mom and dad, they sold everything and moved in to poverty.
Right.
It was a choice. It's like, it's so different when you don't have the choice.
Right.
So my parents, I say it like they didn't get to choose. They grew up in it.
Yep.
Still living, in some way. And so I feel like it's so different when you have a mindset of, it just looks so different. The worldview is different. And there's a gratitude and an appreciation and a sense of wanting to help those who need hope and those who still they still are in need of someone and something to reflect God and his love for them. And so that's my heart. And so once we got called into it and moved into that one bedroom, I remember saying, this is for a moment, but not forever, because, we're making our way out of this and,
right.
and we're not going to stay here, but we will always have our hand in it in some way, shape or form.
She was raised, as most people,
right.
in poverty, get a job, get an education, get a good job,
and
move out. And so she was on that track.
Right. I mean,
until
in
she
college
met me.
and saying, I'm getting out, but I'll always probably, have a heart to help in some way.
Yeah.
But I was leaving. And so right after college, I got a job and started working. And then on the drive to that one bedroom inside his parents, in my in-laws' house, really, technically, we're living in one bedroom. I was like, this is not it, and driving. And I was just kind of crying out to the Lord and saying, Lord, we sold all our stuff and we work for this much and this is not looking good, And then I felt like he said, even if I gave you like your own house, your own car, your own whatever, like, what would you do with it? And is it still, and I felt like the Lord was just like impressing on my heart. Like, it's still like, I want to surrender it to the Lord, like no matter what season we're in. And so it was probably around that time that I said, yeah, this is where we're supposed to be. And this is where we're going to spend our time, even though not saying that it was easy. And so even in that, it was a challenge, but we remained faithful and we saw God work. But it was a tough challenge. I call it my desert season. Yeah.
I mean, I would say this too. We talk about this sometimes. She, growing up, took advantage of the types of programs that we offer today.
100%.
And so in many ways, firsthand saw the value of those programs. And when you're in those situations, the needs that you have and just the opportunities. And then as she grew up too, I mean, even in college, she was volunteering at local schools in North Omaha. She just always had a heart to give back. She didn't come from a missionary mindset or perspective. She thought she was more going to go to the Peace Corps or make a difference in
more
some sort of
philanthropic way in worldview instead of like a ministry and a faith-filled, route. So
always carried that heart. But I think to her point too, it's a lot of constantly going back and saying, God, is this where you have us? Because in nights where days you're trying to put young kids to bed and kids are smoking stuff on your deck and throwing stuff and there's fights happening outside your window
or drive-by
and drive-bys happening towards your house with your kids. I mean, there's all these moments over the years where it's like, is this really where it's at? Like, are we really supposed to be? God, would you want us to be in this situation? But being in relationship and constantly having a heart, God, we want to be wherever you want us to be. And that's what's kept us where we are. Yeah.
And I feel like as we look at our stories, it's so unique because you have, the two very different backgrounds, but same heart. And I feel like God's using that as you look back just to play a role strategically for Abide and the work that we're doing. So it's kind of a beautiful picture. It's a neat picture of
Only
God using
God.
both of. I know it really
Only
is.
God.
Right. This is the two will become one.
Yes.
Right?
That's it.
Yes.
You know, you leave your mother and father. And,
Yes.
And you're walking. That's really, really rich, really good. You two are probably the most driven leaders that I've ever met. You always have something that you're just pushing forward, pushing out, and yet fully grounded for where you're at and what you're doing. So what are you excited about right now? Like, what's exciting?
It's good.
Yeah.
I feel like
Go ahead.
there's always things on the horizon.
Oh, so many.
We were talking about this. You know, I'm already looking forward to some things that we're doing next year, and I think in general, the thing that I'm excited about is living out our purpose, which is to see people live on purpose and leverage their influence. And you know, whether it's doing podcasts like this, whether it's speaking and sharing, whether it's a church that we just launched and mobilizing people to make disciples who get to live that out, projects we're doing on campus. I feel like, you know, for me, it's the reminder of, man, I'm called to see a movement of game changers, people who live on purpose and leverage their influence wherever they are. And just being reminded about that on a consistent basis is probably what gets me up in the morning, what gets me excited, and what continues to motivate me.
Josh, let me ask you a quick question on leverage your influence. I think that's really rich. That's really good. I think one thing I've just realized, when you have a public platform, it's almost feels like, okay, this is how I leverage my influence. I can say things, people will listen, I can grab groups. Yeah. What would you say to a person that doesn't necessarily have a platform? How would they leverage their influence? Yeah.
Well, I think we all have a platform. The question is how big.
Good.
And so we have a platform first and foremost with our kids. And so how am I intentionally helping to raise them up so that they can pursue their God-given calling? Most of us, we live in a neighborhood. And so we have influence with neighbors and coworkers where we work and people at the gym and people at the grocery store. And so it's more about saying, God, what have you given me? What are the relationships you've given me? What are the resources you've given me? What are the gifts that you've given me? And how can I be intentional about using those to impact the world? I think the danger is sometimes you take like a stay-at-home mom and they feel like, man, like I can't do that. And the truth is, I love the quote that I heard one time. Sometimes it's not about what you do, but it's about who you raise. And I mean, you might be raising the next leader that changes the world or invents something or creates something or that encourages somebody. And so I think, we look past, you know, the little things, the people who are in our pathway. But the truth is we all have influence. We all have a platform. It's seeing through the lens and then saying, you know, I'm going to be intentional with the circles that God has placed me in.
I'm going to steal, it's not what you do, it's who you raise.
I stole it from somebody else. I can't remember who it was, but I stole it from somebody else.
I say it 3 times and then it becomes mine.
Yeah.
So.
That's right.
Well, I guess it's mine now.
Jen, what are you excited about?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, on a personal level, the cohort that I'm a part of, I'm just so excited to learn some more. It's such rich learning. I'm being stretched, but it's been such a season of just investment in that area for me and myself as I'm investing in so many areas in my life to learn and have an area in my life to just continue to like let God pour into me. It's been such a good thing for me, a gift. And so I'm excited to just learn more and to learn more about God's story. I feel like I say, you know, my parents taught me God's heart, but I didn't know his story. And over the years, I've learned that, but just in a richer way. I feel like it's been something that excites me. On an Abide side, I'm really excited for the December Christmas drive-through. I mean, so much fun. I mean, that's one of my favorite events and times of the year. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just read a stat that said, and I think the numbers are wrong, but I'll say it with confidence, so they'll be right. But I do think it's over 60%. I want to say it was 64% of Christians have actually never shared their faith. Like 60 to think about that, right? And so you're going through this. Can you share just like help someone who's a Christian out there right now going, okay, wait, that's me. I've never actually shared my faith.
Yeah.
What are you learning that you would say to them real quick to how to do that?
To share their faith?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Just to start with your story and how God's used your story, and God's in the business of redeeming stories. So how has God redeemed your story? Where were you and where are you today? And how has God spoken into your heart and life, and who is he to you?
Yeah. What I love about that is no one can argue with my story.
That's right.
You can't tell me it's not real, right? And so that's really rich. That's really good. It's really good. Yeah. Yeah. Josh, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I'm excited too, and we're excited in this season to do more stuff together. And as our kids are getting older, and even just, whether it's podcasts like this, other opportunities that God is opening up, I think entering into a season where, for sometimes it can feel like, one person's doing this and the other person's at home doing this. And so just to be in a season where we feel like we get to do some more things together is something that's pretty exciting.
Oh yeah, it's fun.
Well, you guys have clearly illustrated and given that, challenges aren't going to stop you. You're going to persevere and go through, which is a mark of, again, just terrific leadership, right? So what's a challenge you're just working through right now?
Yeah. I mean, time. Oh my goodness. Time management. I feel like that's something
big time.
We only get 24 hours in a day. I'm like,
Big time.
Goodness, what are we going to do? And so it's just 4 kids, school, homeschool, the ministry, church, all of that, just allowing God to craft windows and create windows to use us, but to steward it all well, and to say, okay, God, like at the end of the day, I've done my best, and to surrender the rest to him. I feel like just balancing all of it can be a tension.
That's good.
But that's probably a challenge for us right now, for me.
Big time. Yeah, life is busy. Time. I'd say time, but with time is energy. And so having energy for what's most important, for the things that, fuel you, but also the things that provide the most impact. And so I'm realizing it's like, I've got to make sure I'm not spending a bunch of time doing things that really take my energy away, so that I can have energy for the things that are most important. So I'd say the time, the energy. I remember hearing somebody say, the more successful or the more you have going on, the harder it is to say no. I always thought I was great at saying no. But I'm just realizing it's hard to say no. And if you don't say no, I mean, you're just constantly on this cycle, this wheel. And so trying to for me, organizationally, to delegate more, say no to more things, and just try to be more laser focused in
saying
those
yes
areas.
To the right things.
Yes to the right things.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
So
yeah, I always had a friend who once said to me, because, as me, I like to be a people pleaser. No's a hard word for me.
Yeah.
And they just reminded me that every yes is actually a no to just someone else.
That's right.
And so a lot of time my no's were to my family,
Yep.
Which
That's
wasn't
good.
a great no. And so, that's really good. Tell us real quick, what is one or just one of your greatest successes that you're like, wow, this was as a leader, a great success. Personal or professional?
Well, I'd say I'll go back one more to the challenge.
Yeah.
Doing life in an inner city context is challenging.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's so many daily consistent challenges, whether it's recently, somebody we're working with, there was a shooting that happened, somebody lost their life and several others were shot, and just the challenges of growing and building something in an inner city context is extremely hard. And, people are afraid to come down to the community. And so I think that's something that we live with on a consistent basis that just wears on you and that you're constantly fighting against.
Oh, yeah.
Because then I would say, if I were to say what's one of our greatest successes, I would say still being in the game. And like faith was the word that came to my mind, and just faithfulness in the midst of the context. And I think, part of leadership is you want to put on your game face and you want to inspire people and you want to encourage and promote. And I think great leaders do that. But I think the reality of the challenges that are just consistent, that don't go away. I mean, I think of the stuff that part of this is hard when you live in it. We see it through a different lens. But I think about some of the families that we're working with, and the teen mom who not too long ago who had twins and has just grown up under horrible circumstances. And I mean, we're at the bedside, Friday night, I think, at the bedside of her 6-month-old son who's getting ready to lose his life. And the only thing she knows to do is say, hey, can you baptize my son? He's going to die in a couple weeks or in a couple days. And like, just, I mean, getting some water out of the sink and just doing a little baptism for her to help comfort her. And then over the next couple of days, Jen's buying clothes so that she can have pictures with her son and her other son before he passes away. And it's just those types of things. I mean, the constant people that we're trying to encourage and support and care for. And just, I mean, to my wife, she's much better than I am. But there's so much that like people would never know that she does, and the people she encourages, like that I think the greatest challenge, but also the greatest like success is just the fact that, man, we're still standing.
Still in it.
We're still here.
By the grace of God, honestly.
By the grace of God.
Yeah. I think it's something similar. As far as success goes, it's faithfulness. And I feel like as we've been faithful, God has been faithful.
Yeah, that's right.
And as we've stayed the course, he's shown up time and time again. It's more of a matter of us remembering than anything. And
that's right.
And I think of several things. So I think of like the investment in our marriage. I feel like that's been a success that we've invested so much intentional, like just time and energy and focus and strategically planning so that our marriage flourishes, and that it, even in hard times and valleys, that we remember the mountaintops, that we remember the joy, and that's what's kept us. And so I feel like that's another.
Having consistent, date nights. And, people, whenever we talk about marriages and people ask about that, number one, we say you got to have consistent date days, date nights, whatever that looks like. And, people say, man, it's expensive. And it is expensive, but it's not an expense. It's an investment.
Yes.
And it's the greatest investment that you could make. And that's been one of the things that's probably carried us too.
Right.
Is just the way that we've been able to invest in that relationship and our kids. I think of our kids and just the investment there. And
that's another success I think of. I feel like as far as being a ministry, always keeping that in front of us as our first ministry, our family and our kids and our marriage. And that's been a priority from the start, and something that obviously it's something to manage, but I feel like keeping that a priority has been a great success.
Yeah. And so far, our kids, they still have to listen to everything that we're saying. But
12 and under, they're still pretty.
People say we're in those golden years, so don't, we might not be saying this about 4 or 5 years, 6 years from now, but I will say this, our kids, their hearts, their understanding of what we do, why we do it, and their participation in it on a consistent basis. We had a fundraiser night the other night. Both of our boys, were there, 10 and 12, a part of it. Our girls were there. They were there helping set up days earlier. They are second Saturday serves, the Christmas. They're there running around, serving, participating. So definitely you've done a great job.
Well, you
with
have
our
too.
children.
They have their opinions, that's for sure. They have their thoughts. And
Yeah. Well, you guys have talked about it, and you have so much going on, so many things happening. Let me ask this question, because I think this is something I struggle with. I'm sure whoever's listening on this would struggle as well. Just how do you guys keep faith first in just the family of everything's going around, right? The busyness, right? The work, the job, right? Yes, it's a ministry, but still it's like there's still everything of the planning, all those. So how do you do that? How do you, what are some things that you guys do to keep faith first in that?
I would say, ever since we got married and we just knew we wanted faith to be at the center of our lives. I grew up, again, with a model. My mom, different than my dad, my mom, in the midst of raising all the kids, every morning, most of the time she'd be sitting on her toilet, not going to the bathroom, but just sitting in her restroom, door closed, going through devotional before she would go work out, 5 a.m. And so that was a picture I had growing up. And so I wanted those rhythms. I remember hearing too, when we got into ministry, some people would say the only time pastors and leaders get into the Bible is when they're prepping for a sermon or prepping. And I always said, I never want that to be a reality in my life. And so from the beginning, we've tried to cultivate habits, man. Every morning we're doing a devotional. We're in the Word. We're, And you know, before kids, it looked a certain way. During kids and young kids, like we've had to learn to give ourselves grace because it doesn't look this perfect setup. But that rhythm has been pretty consistent for, 15 years since we've been married. I've always said the most attractive thing about my wife is her intentionality in getting in the Word and learning and growing and being connected to God. And I mean, she might have, one kid who she's feeding with one hand, but she's reading over here with the other one and just being intentional about it.
Right. So well, thank you. I sometimes say, go to Dad. I'm like, just go to Dad. He's over there.
I don't have the same responsibilities. I will say that.
Go ask your father. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, same. I mean, just keeping God first in the morning. It's not always perfect, and that giving myself permission to just say it's okay if it's just one verse. It's okay if it's just listening to a podcast in the season or listening to a song or, just doing whatever it takes to keep God forefront and center. And I think also when you've been through life and as life happens, you see that God's the only constant. When He becomes your source, your refuge, your strength, He fills you up, and so you know where to run. And I feel like we know where to run at this point. We know He's constant and He never changes. And I feel like that's what keeps us keeping faith first, because we know without God and getting filled up first that we won't be our best and we wouldn't be able to be used by God. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I would just encourage people, you just got to be intentional.
Yeah.
And it's like any habit that sometimes you start, it's hard to get it going. It's hard to sometimes get it off the ground, but one verse, I mean, YouVersion Bible app, you can carry that thing wherever you go. Simple plans that you can do on there, some songs, doing it with other people as people of faith. I remember seeing this circular matrix, and it talked about the different aspects of our life. There was this business leader was kind of laying this out, and he had faith, he had family, he had fitness, he had professional life, financial life. He had all these these areas of life, and he said it's kind of like this wagon wheel, and in different seasons, different parts are up and down, but the key is that they're all balanced. And as I looked at his diagram, it didn't sit well with me. And I think sometimes, we instead of faith being at the center and everything else comes from that, we make faith just another aspect of our life. And so we approach faith the same way we approach our work, or we approach faith the same way we approach fitness or finances. And the truth is, faith is at the heart of Christians. We do what we do because of our faith. Yeah. And so we have to be intentional about prioritizing it, about being intentional about it. And so that's been a value core to who we are. And again, I would just say this, we've had to give ourselves grace because it can look pretty messy not good. And all right, kids, we're going to pray together.
Perfect,
Be quiet. We're trying to pray.
All the interruptions.
Guys, we're going to do a family devotional tonight. And so we're going to sit down and we're going to prop it open. If you don't sit down right now, you're going to be in trouble.
You're the one praying tonight, right? It's like,
you know what? Just because you're acting out, you're praying. Yep. And you better do it with a good heart because God's watching you.
You know what?
So real.
What I love and what I heard is, intentionality, but also the grace, right? And I just was reading and finished reading John Acuff's book Soundtracks.
Oh yeah,
so good.
And in
Love
it, he was
message.
talking about how he had a goal to read 100 books in a year.
Yep.
And he goes, all of a sudden in my mind, I had all these rules for what counted as a book, and he thought, wait a minute, this is my goal. Why are there any rules?
Right.
So he's like, audiobooks counted. He goes, he's a comic book reader. He goes, comic books counted.
Yeah.
Right? And he said, why do I? And I think sometimes, especially with faith and especially devotions, we put someone else's rules, right, of reading the scriptures, right? And it's like, no, just start and have grace. It's your rules, right? What you're saying and growing, just make it at that hub. And
that's right.
Also, that's really good. That was rich. Thank you. All right, as we wrap today, if you could share one thing with someone listening today, what would it be?
I would just share, man, God's got a purpose for your life. And You know, we're not designed to just go through life. God, we don't have what we have just for ourselves and for our comfort. And, you know, the enemy to impact is like our comfort and being comfortable with where we are. But the biggest blessing, and the Bible says it's greater to give than receive, when we give ourselves away. And that's what purpose is all about. It's all about, what has God given me that I can use to contribute to the world around me? What's the influence? What's the platform? And just living intentionally. I think so many people walk through life aimlessly and never really discover why they were created, the purpose that God has for their lives. And so for me, it starts with getting in God's word. It starts with, you know, having devotional time. It starts with prayer. And as you do that, as you ask questions, as you surround yourself with the right people, you start to discover the purpose that God has for your life. But you got to be intentional.
That is good. I'd say to hold on. I feel like with the world and all that we've been through in the last few years, I know every single person's been impacted and affected in some way, shape, or form. And I'd say hold on and to remain faithful, and that there's joy ahead, that God loves you, and that in the different seasons of valleys and mountaintops of life, that if you remain faithful, God is faithful. And if you draw near to him, he'll draw near to you.
That's good. So good. That's good. Well, this has been so rich, so well. Thank you so much for your generosity of time to be here today, and generosity of words and wisdom, which are going to just go really far. And so you've influenced my life greatly. Where can people find you on social?
Oh, my goodness. Instagram, Facebook.
She's a much better follow than I am.
What's your Instagram?
Jen Dotzler.
Jen Dotzler.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Josh Dotzler.
Josh Dotzler. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll have that in there. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate
Yeah.
you. All right.
Hey,
We're
love
better
you.
together.
So grateful for you.
Thank you so
Yes.
much for having us on
Yes,
here.
thank
Appreciate
you.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for being a part of this month's Greg Griffith Leadership Podcast. Join Greg next month for leadership insights to faithfully love and faithfully lead. Now go be terrific today.